2-year-old fillies lining up in behind that Metro. Home Building Center starting gate for today's 10th race. Let's send it back over to track announcer Vance Cameron.
Rock and Roll K. Speaking of Shadow, Woodmere Jade, Marina Del Rey. Go Sister, Soul Sister. Too much for you. Hamac Jazzy Girl. Top of the stretch. Now approaching a start. The rough and pacing, leaving out is Woodmere Jade. Speaking of Shadow, going right with her, and then third to the turn, Marina Del Rey. Racing from fourth along the inside, that's Rock and Roll Case. Now dropping in fifth is Go Sister, Soul Sister. Away sixth is Too Much for You, and then the trailer, Hamac Jazzy Girl. So they're on the backstretch, and the quarter pole bound, led by Woodmere Jade for Miles Sr. Speaking of Shadow, out of the two-hole now, up to engage the leader. All alone in third, Marina Del Rey, opening quarters up in 28 and 3. Back into fourth is Rock and Roll Case. Then in fifth, it's Go Sister, Soul Sister. Racing six is Too Much for You. And trailing the field, Hamac Jazzy Girl down the stretch, approaching the half mile. Woodmere Jade will get them halfway home. Second is Speaking of Shadow, second. Then in third, Marina Del Rey. Fourth is Rock and Roll K's. On the outside, Go Sister, Soul Sister. Up the rail goes Too Much for You. And the trailer, Hamac Jazzy Girl, 57-4 was the half mile. Over to the 5/8 and Woodmere Jade there. Speaking of Shadow is second. Up on the outside, Rock and Roll Cage is coming third. They're 3 wide going to 3/4 in between horses. Speaking of Shadow, on the outside, that is Rock and Roll Cage second. Now moving up third, Marina Del Rey. Fading to fourth is Woodmere Jade. 3/4 in 1:28 and 2. Down to an 1/8 of a mile left to go. And that's Speaking of Shadow turning home with the lead. Rock and Roll Cage not far away on the outside. Marina Del Rey is picked up third. Deep stretch. Now on the wire they come next. Speaking of Shadow does it free-legged for Mike McGuigan in the PEI Colt Stakes. Then Rock and Roll Cage, Marina Del Rey, 157 and 1.
Well, this filly continues to impress, and today without the hobbles on, no problem. Trainer driver Mike McGuigan, he does a great job with the young horses, and he does a great job driving as well. A real good job here in this 10th race. He had to go to plan B and get in the 2-hole after Miles Heffernan and Woodmere Jade. They wanted to cut it 28 and 3, but Mike McGuigan had his sights set on the outside, and at the half, it looked like he was going to pull pocket, and he did at 5/8. He pulled pocket with Rock and Roll K's coming strong up the backstretch, and they were 3 wide battling down the backstretch, and around the last turn, it ended up being the 2 Speaking of Shadow and the 1 Rock and Roll K's battling all the way down the stretch. And Speaking of Shadow, dead game here today, fends off that late challenge from Barrio, and Rock and Roll K's gets it done here, close it out 28-4. Nice trip, 157 and 1, right to her record. She gets it done here in a PEI Colt Stakes 2-year-old filly Gold Division.
Speaking of Shadow, on her way to the 10th race winner's circle, pacing filly 2, she's by Arts Peak from the Shadow Play Dam, Silver Hill Bunna, owned by Josh McDonald of Edmonton, Alberta, and Mark McDonald from Cornwall. The filly bred by Lee Gavin of Tignish. She's trained and driven to victory by Mike McGuigan and right to her record of 157 and 1, doing it free-legged today. Speaking of Shadow, in the PEI Colt Stakes.